Hi there, you're listening to the Bigfoot Society podcast, and I'm Jeremiah Byron. Every week I talk to individuals who have experienced Sasquatch in some way or another, so you won't want to miss an episode. Make sure you're subscribed on the platform that you're listening to, and share this episode with a friend. It does not cost a thing, and it helps the show continue to grow. If you'd like to hear Bigfoot Society episodes early and ad-free, you can do so by becoming a Patreon supporter or a YouTube channel member. Links to those are in the show notes. In Bigfoot Society, I've taken far too much of your time so far, so let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we got the privilege of talking to a gentleman that I met at the Van Meter Visitor Festival this last weekend, September 30th, 2023. He came up to the booth and he had let me know that he had something really interesting happen to him back in the 1980s, I believe. So, Dave, how's it going today?
Going pretty good.
I'm excited to chat with you. I wish we had gotten the time to do it at the festival, but it was so busy. It was incredible, like just person after person coming for hours. So I'm glad that I had gotten your phone number so I could give you a call.
Yeah, I remember there's quite a line there. A lot of people want to get in.
Absolutely. So Dave, you've told me a little bit about what happens, but I'm just curious if you could kind of let the listeners know what you had experienced back in the 1980s with your sighting.
Sure. Yeah, it was in the summer of '84, and it was I can't tell you what day of the week it was, but I remember that a friend of mine by the name of Rob and I were out catfishing, and we normally fish off a boat, but this time we decided to do a little high bank fishing. In other words, we go to the river and fish off the high side, the highest bank, because that's usually where the water cuts in deep, and the catfish like to lay down in there, and we just put our lines out and kind of let it float down in. So it was about 10 o'clock that night, and we've been there for maybe an hour, and kind of give you a lay of the land. We're about maybe a quarter mile from the road where we pulled over and walked up into the riverbank, and we're in trees. It's kind of a wooded area, and we're just out there fishing in the dark with one little dim flashlight, because we don't usually need to see much when you're just fishing. You kind of just let the line do the talking to you. And about that time, we heard something stomping through the woods upstream from us, and that's not unusual for us because we'll hear deer, occasional beaver will come down and splash the water, but this time it was kind of breaking the sticks, making a bit of a noise, and then all of a sudden there was a splash. So we figured whatever was walking through there kind of fell off into the high banks, just like we were fishing. Didn't think much of it, and then just a few minutes later we could hear it. It had swum across to the other side. The other side of the bank, you could hear it kind of stomping around on the bank, and then another splash like it fell back in. By this time, it was swimming again back towards our side of the bank, but the current of the river was pulling it down towards us, and we could hear the thing breathing. We could hear this thing rather breathing heavy, because I think it was running earlier. So we're starting to get a little concerned about this thing going to get caught up in our fishing lines. So we reel in our lines, and it's not really splashing, just breathing heavy. And we finally decided to get our flashlight out and try to light up what this thing was. At this point, remember, we had kind of a dim flashlight. So what we saw right in the middle of the river was a head. And I'll say it was a head like a human head in shape. It didn't have any ears sticking out. It didn't have any antlers. There was not muzzle or nose sticking out. It was just a round head. And of course, it was covered with hair, and the water had gotten it wet. So when we hit it with a flashlight, it kind of shined a little bit off of the wet hair. Its eyes were looking right at us. They were in front of us like stereo optics. And when it saw the flashlight, it went under the water. And that's what kind of spooked us. What animal would be swimming in the water, above water, breathing heavy, looks like a human face, human head, And then the minute we light it up, it was able to grab a breath and go underwater. We decided to get out of there. We weren't too sure what the thing was. All we knew was that it was coming closer to us, and it was going to end up between us and the car. And we decided at that time we should get out of there. And that's really about it in a nutshell.
That's wild. And that was in 1984, you said?
Yes.
And
yep.
What river was that?
I believe that was a Raccoon. I believe you're on the Raccoon.
Yep, that's what I figured. Being over by Minburn, that's your main river over there. And
yes.
Have you ever shared this with anyone else before?
No, well, other than my family the night of, but didn't really talk about it a lot. The gentleman I was fishing with was one of the local teachers of the school system in that area, and he was a science teacher, and he kept it to himself. He told me later on when we got together, he said that he really was concerned about telling anybody about that because of his position. Well, that's being a student teacher.
That's even so he was a science teacher. Man, what kind of conversation did you guys have afterwards after you saw that hairy head kind of disappear down into the water? And
we did have a little bit of a conversation, like, what did we just see? I mean, we tried to rule it out because, like I say, we both do a lot of catfishing, and we've been on the rivers before. And if you ever been out at night, the beaver sometimes will slap that water pretty hard with their tails. And that's kind of what we thought the first splash might have been a beaver or that thing had fallen in. So we ruled that out because beavers don't duck. I mean, yeah, they can swim underwater, but this head was much larger than a beaver head would ever have been when we lit it up. So we ruled out beaver and muskrat, any kind of a critter that likes the water. And of course, the fact that we didn't see any ears or antlers kind of took care of anything like deer. So we just kind of checked off what it wasn't and kind of left us with what could it be. And that's where we kind of felt that, if anybody we tell this story to anybody, they probably won't believe us. Now, remember, 1984, a couple of guys out fishing, I could just hear them, oh yeah, how much beer did you have before you go fishing? But the truth of the matter was that we didn't have any beer that night. So we were stone cold sober and just did not enjoy what happened to us.
That's a great detail to know, because sometimes, I have these interviews and the person can't say that they were actually 100% sober, and that makes a huge difference. So that's a huge detail that you were actually, you weren't drinking that night. And, when you remember, if you can remember back looking at the head in the water, the hairy head, was the hair mostly on one part of the head, or was it just like completely covered with hair that you could see, or do you remember any details like that?
Yes, it was looking right at me. Rob was to my right, and by the time I had the flashlight, so the time I lit it up, it was basically straight in front of me, and I'd say the distance from where I was standing to where it was in the river might have been 20 feet, maybe 15. And so I got a really good look at it, and what kind of surprised me was that it was wet, top to bottom, dome-shaped head, if you will, hair all the way around. And it did have eyes. I could see its eyes, and they did not reflect. They would normally, when you light up a raccoon or something, those eyes flash back gold at you on the flashlight. Now, these eyes are just black, cold black, not reflective, just two black spots. And the only thing that was reflecting was the wet hair.
Very, very interesting. Could you see the skin color at all?
No. Okay. No, we couldn't see the skin color, but I will say the hair overall was a very dark color, very dark brown to maybe black. It was night. It was dark. The river was black. The sky there was no moon or anything that night, if I remember. And like I said, the flashlight wasn't that bright. We just had an old flashlight with us. It wasn't a very bright light. Enough light to make sure you didn't step in a hole or something when you're trying to walk back to the car.
Can you think back to let's say the soundscape, what kind of things were you hearing around you at that time? If you remember any certain animals or anything out of place or anything like that?
Okay. before the big splash, the first splash, I said we could hear it in the woods. And it was like you could hear it breaking twigs or snapping branches, if you will. So we kind of thought maybe a deer was being, was on the run or something. But it was 10 o'clock at night, and that's dark here. And so we could hear the cracking and the breaking of the twigs, and then the splash. And I mean, it's like if you had jumped in off the bank, a big splash. Then there was silence for a while. Then the next thing we heard was, I'm going to say like feet stomping on a muddy bank, if you will. It's like it was trying to get its balance or climb up the bank, and it couldn't. So you hear there was no real pattern. It was a thump, 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 thump splash, and then more of a splash again, but not near as big a splash. More like someone entering the water, just turned around and kind of jumped back in. At that point, we didn't hear anything for a while. Then you could hear the breathing, and I'm going to say heavy nasal breathing through like a nose, and it was breathing heavy, big, heavy breaths. There was no splash into the water, and it's like someone doing a swim with their arms, breaking the water. There was none of that. So it was nothing breaking the water. Just this, almost like someone's out of breath, breathing, and was getting louder. That's when we turned the lights on. That's when what is making that noise? Because I've never heard an animal breathing in the water like that. So then it ducked.
It's very, very interesting. And what about, let's say, any birds or other creatures of the forest, or was it maybe no other sounds at all that you were hearing?
No, there was no other sounds. 10 o'clock, most of the birds are asleep. Trying to think if I heard anything else. I don't think I even heard any of the farm dogs in the area. I think it was pretty quiet that night.
Interesting. By the Minburn area and the Raccoon, there's a few nature areas. Were you in close proximity to any of those nature areas?
We were about 2 to 3 miles west of Minburn itself, and we were down in the valley. And this is a pretty good little valley. There's some really nice bluffs and hills in that area. So I can't tell you if there was a nature valley or a nature area but I do know it was heavily wooded in that particular part. There was some cropland, but that was only in the floodplains. But for the most part, we were in between the hills, which were all wooded hills.
That's the area. Yeah. The valleys, the ridges, the gulches. I mean, that's it, man. Do you remember around that time, or maybe a few years before, were there any other reports of creatures or being seen, like Bigfoot or anything else in this area?
No, I can't say I remember. And at that time, I really wasn't following anything. Wasn't even looking for anything. So unaware of anything at that time.
Interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with the BFRO at all, which is a Bigfoot Field Researchers organization, but if you look up Dallas County in there were a few reports by the Raccoon River around 1978, I believe. You may find that interesting. So in the reports around the Raccoon River, albeit not in Minburn area per se, but in other areas, they've even gone into the 2000s where there's been sightings, and it's just it's a very, very interesting area, the Raccoon River. But man, do you ever feel like you want to see that kind of creature again, or how did that affect the rest of your life?
Well, I will say that it put a question mark in my beliefs of what's out there and what's not out there. I've got room for a lot of things that could be walking on this planet, and when I listen to people that tell stories, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But in this case, since I can have an experience, I did have an experience, I'm going to say that I guess I lean more towards they're out there, but how can they be? What allows them to continue? I mean, people talk about where are the bones? Where's more evidence? Yet I saw one, or think I saw one, and so more of a believer. But as far as wanting to see another one, maybe not at night with a dim flashlight. That's a little too close for comfort.
Absolutely, and I'll end out with this question. If you had to categorize what you saw, because people categorize Bigfoot in many different ways, some people say maybe more of an ape type creature, more of some type of humanoid creature, or something in the middle. Do you have any leaning towards what you might categorize what you saw as?
What I saw I would lean towards more of a humanoid type person, more very, very hairy. I don't see a lot of ape features in it. It was more human shape with hair from head to shoulder. And of course the shoulders are underwater. So that's where I would categorize it.
Very interesting. Well, Dave, I really appreciate you taking a few minutes to chat with me today. And this is pretty cool because it's yet another incident that happened in Iowa that was not documented, and now it's documented. So I really appreciate you talking to me this afternoon.
Well, my pleasure. I enjoyed it.